Hello and welcome back to this week's edition of the Big Ten Student U Indiana Basketball Show. I'm Lexi Vanetti and he's Ari Bruckman. Now, Teri Moren's team just beat Michigan on the road 78-60. The Hoosiers are hot and had 4 different players in double digits on Sunday. There were key performances from Penn, Berger, and Holmes, but one player that continues to stand out is Allie Patberg. She had 21 points that also led to her being named Big Ten Player of the Week. This game proves it's important to get her going and to get her going early on.
Yeah, Allie Patberg in this one, 21 points on 8 of 12 shooting. Just a really efficient performance for her. But the one thing I looked to that made her so successful was her ability to get her teammates involved. I mean, they won this game by 18 points, but it was attributed to the 7 assists to lead all players in assists for the game by Patberg. And frankly, she does a nice job of facilitating the ball, creating other opportunities for some of these big-time scorers like Jalen Penn.
And the Hoosiers locked in the 4th seed for the upcoming Big Ten tournament. To dive deeper into the postseason talk, we're going to toss it over to Connor and Brandon. Brandon?
Thanks, Lexi. So, joined by Connor Hines now, I'm Brandon Schaff. Well, Connor, we've been covering the team pretty much the whole season now, and we're really getting into the thick of the Big Ten tournament, which Indiana could be facing Rutgers in the first round here, potentially, depending on what happens with that Illinois and Wisconsin matchup in the first round. Do you have any predictions as to what's going to be coming up?
Yeah, you know, I give Indiana a pretty good shot to move through against Rutgers, Brandon, should that be the matchup come Friday afternoon. But this Rutgers team, not one to be overlooked at all, coming off a huge 4-point victory on Sunday against Iowa in overtime. And Rutgers teams, year after year, time after time, they're going to prioritize defense first. And that's what Teri Moren talked about earlier in the year when Indiana was finally able to get a win over Rutgers. That was actually back on New Year's Eve. Teri Moren just talking about, you know, being able to tame Rutgers' defensive physicality and prowess a little bit. And again, going back to that win over Rutgers for Indiana earlier in the year, able to tame Arella Garantes, who, I mean, she goes as this team goes. Arella Garantes not able to force up a single three-pointer in that game, and that was largely due in part to the efforts of both Jalen Penn, first of all, and then Allie Patberg's defensive prowess as well later in that game. I think if Jalen Penn and Allie Patberg perform not only offensively but on the defensive end as well, should point to good things, because you know we've talked so much about Allie Patberg's offensive abilities this season for Indiana, but equally important in this game on the defensive end, Rutgers, a defense-first team. I think Indiana's got to come out and match that intensity, match that physicality level. And things should generally go in the right direction for Indiana, should that be the matchup on Friday afternoon.
Well, look, you mentioned the big name with Allie Patberg right there, and Allie Patberg named the Big Ten Player of the Week this week after another 20-point performance against Michigan there, as they just talked about. And it's really been exciting to see what she's been able to do in the regular season here. Do you think that can continue here in the postseason, as now this women's team has matched the same number of wins that they had when they won the WNIT just a couple years ago?
You know, Allie Patberg, she is such a crucial part of this team, as we all know so well. And, you know, having that extra year of eligibility, that's just such a luxury for this program, talking about the big picture moving forward. But another point guard I want to quickly mention, Jalen Penn. She's averaging almost 14 points per game in 4 matchups against Rutgers since she arrived on campus, and she continued to perform in Indiana's win earlier this season against the Scarlet Knights. So I think Jalen Penn you've got to look out for as well, but I mean, there's no overlooking Allie Patberg and what she means to this team as well.
Yeah, well, you also mentioned Jalen Penn there. She had her 1,000th career point against Rutgers when they faced them on New Year's Day. All right, and let's take a look at the bracket coming here for the Big Ten tournament. Connor, you have some predictions about what this is going to look like. We talked about how Indiana could be taking on Rutgers, but let's take a look at the bigger picture. What do you think we could be seeing here potentially as the weekend goes along?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, as we look at Indiana, I do think IU gets through against Rutgers in that game. I think, you know, combined with Jalen Penn and Allie Patberg's defensive abilities, Indiana's just the better, more well-rounded team. I think IU has a serious chance to get through against Rutgers. But then they've got to play the top seed, number 1 Maryland. And Maryland already 2 matchups with Indiana, 2-0 this season against the Hoosiers. I think Maryland's just going to be a little too much for Indiana in that matchup. We know what Brenda Friese's teams have been capable of doing really ever since she joined the Big Ten. So I think Maryland's firepower and offense is going to be a little much for Indiana there. But an upset in the championship, I'm calling it right here. Northwestern, Big Ten regular season champions, Joe McEwen has put together just a phenomenal season with the Wildcats up in Evanston. And I think Northwestern beats Maryland in the championship, number 2 over number 1. and I think Northwestern goes on to win the Big Ten tournament. It's going to be a very exciting weekend up in Indianapolis, and again, that begins with Indiana and possibly Rutgers, most likely Rutgers. But you never know. I think IU, most importantly, you've got to get that first win on Friday afternoon. See what you can do moving forward against Maryland. But again, getting that one win in the tournament, that's just so important for not only Indiana's momentum in the conference tournament, but as you progress, obviously, into the NCAA conversation as well. Indiana, a 4 seed in this week's ESPN bracketology. So you got to get as many wins, bunch them up as many as you can before the selection show, and I think Indiana should be in pretty good shape for the postseason.
Well, you transitioned it perfectly into the NCAA tournament. They're projected as a 4 seed right now, as they are for the Big Ten tournament, which will get started, for Indiana at least, this Friday. For us here at the BTN Indiana Basketball Show, BTN Student U Indiana Basketball Show, Connor Hines and Brandon Schaff, and we will see you at the next episode.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the BTN Student Indiana Basketball Show. The Hoosiers are set to their postseason underway Friday in Indy. Catch our show all season long on the IU Sports Media, Instagram, and YouTube pages. We'll see you next week.